Good morning to everyone, and let me first and foremost thank the organizers, Eva, Thomas, Matthias, and above all, Marcos, for so many emails and exchange of information over the last few months. I will argue above all that we all face in Europe a unique opportunity to give a new centrality for research and innovation in association with a new framework of prevention, preparedness, and readiness. But above all, this will require a new and strengthened scientific activism. And that is the reason why I accept to be here, and I believe the Hamburg Science Summit is an adequate forum to promote in Germany, in the time we live, in this very timely occasion, scientific activism by having leading German institutions, leading German associations, and all over Europe to really understand why we need all of you to make it happen. And this is a unique opportunity, but it needs to be materialized. And essentially, I will try over this brief speech to build in the reports which were already mentioned by Enrico Leto, by Mario Draghi, by President Niinistö, and certainly in our own report, in a way that we need really to understand how can we change and how can we make an European strategic autonomy. And certainly it is not necessary to reinvent the wheel. We know how important is frontier research, and I'm sure Maria Leptin later will argue much better than myself, and that we need to do more of that. The European Research Council has been the best of the best, known certainly in Hamburg, in Brussels, but also in Beijing, in Washington, in Cape Town, all over the world, as the leading European program. And we know why. Why did that happen? Because 15 years ago, we all in Europe have made an independent, autonomous program towards the curiosity-driven research. And now, more recently, we know how important has that become together with the disruptive innovation. But this opportunity really needs us to make Choose Europe a reality. Actually, yesterday in the European R&D Days in Brussels, I call for an alert. We have listened Commissioner Zaraev yesterday telling us that the number of new applications for ERC has increased as never before, including scientists that are currently in the United States and want to come to Europe. The number of applications to Marie Curie has increased as never before. But to make this or to make this opportunity a reality, we need adequate budget and adequate governance systems, and we have made it. So let's focus on our priority, together with the need to better adequate collaborative research, and we are in a philanthropic association, and how important we have understood that is really critically important to differentiate research towards industrial competitiveness from that to address emerging societal challenge. By the end of the day, we need also to understand what the French Nobel laureate Jean Tirole and co-authors have alerted us for the need to escape the mid-tech trap that we have entered in Europe. And again, is through frontier and curiosity-driven research together with disruptive innovation, and at the end of the day, to take risks and to understand that failure are a step to success. In order to build on these arguments, I will try essentially to organize my brief speech in 4 parts. I will start by addressing the context, essentially in the new complex of uncertainty. Then I will focus on the need to align, act, and accelerate the overall investment in research and innovation. Third, I will address that can only happen with a new financial framework, and we need to understand where the money needs to come from. Last but not least, I will address the governance issues and the challenge for governance we are challenging in Europe. And I will try essentially to do this in a way to provoke a debate with all of you, not only in this session, but during the day and tomorrow. Let me start with our context. Essentially, 9 months after a new American administration and more than 3 years into the Ukraine war, we need to understand that Europe is definitely the most reliable partner at the world level and the most efficient when we look at outputs per resources involved. But by being proud in the European project, we need to understand that we are lagging behind, particularly in the levels of investment in research and innovation. And this is not just a technical or a scientific issue. This has become a strong political issue in a new complex of uncertainty in a world level, particularly driven, in my understanding, by 4 main vectors of uncertainty. First, we are facing a new and accelerated rate of technical change in a new area of abundance of knowledge, where the search mechanism for reliable knowledge has become an important tool for doing science, but also to promote a collaborative effort throughout Europe. And this needs to be understood with an enormous rise of Chinese science, which cannot be forgotten and should not be misunderstood. Second, we are facing, as we all know, an increasing fragmentation of multilateralism with an increasing regionalization of the big and the larger economies. And this will include new critical decisions for Europe and European research and innovation, also in terms of critical partnerships either with the United States or with China. And again, we need to face that, and that can only be faced with a new revisited strategic autonomy. Third, we know that these 2 main vulnerabilities has been more and more associated with an accelerated rate of social and political polarization. And again, we see in many European regions, also recently here in Germany, but we see that in France, in Spain, in my own country, in Portugal, in the Netherlands, in Nordic countries, that this polarization has been very much associated with the new support of young generations to populist movements. And this cannot be separated from a serious research and innovation agenda and way we need to consider, definitely in science policy, but overall in industrial policy, the role of the quality of jobs for young generations. Last but not least, and mainly because we are in a philanthropic institution, there is a 4th, in my view, vector of increased uncertainty associated with emerging societal challenge. Certainly after the COVID pandemic, very much associated with mental health, but more than ever also the increasing inequality in the access of innovative pharma. Definitely, we also know that the climate disaster that we all are facing are also provoking more and more societal challenge that needs to have a specific research agenda to be addressed. And it is within this complex of uncertainty that there are no easy solutions. And again, to address them, we need to do more frontier research and understand better, certainly the technical, scientific, but also the social and economic context under which we need to act in Europe. That is the reason why, more and more, we believe that we need to align our goals throughout Europe to act promptly in our institutions and to accelerate research and innovation. Certainly, if this was important 1 year ago, is more than ever. 2 days ago, Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank in Brussels, was very clear. We need to accelerate. There is no time to lose. And in the last year, we have discussed it, but now it's time to accelerate its implementation. And my understanding is that there are 3 foreseen changes in the European context, together with the high-level political debate to give defense or to consider defense as the major driver of European competitiveness. And essentially, again, this brings, in my understanding, a critical need to better understand the key role of a strengthened research and innovation system towards a context of prevention, preparedness and readiness in Europe. And I will argue that this will need 4 major task force. First and foremost, a transformative research and innovation agenda, which should and could and can only do or be implemented through a strengthened and standalone framework program for the years to come. And as you know, we have argued the absolute need to consider 4 spheres of action in terms of competitive excellence, expanding what we have done and the way we have done it uniquely in Europe through the European Research Council, more and more through the European Innovation Council, but also considering an effective Choose Europe program. Also promoting collaborative research towards industrial competitiveness and differentiating it from collaborative research to address societal challenge. And fourth, but not last but not least, continuously building up the European research and innovation ecosystem. But this transformative research and innovation agenda will not operate in a vacuum, as always before. So we need to complement it with a clear public procurement at European level. Actually, Mario Draghi 2 days ago in Brussels was very clear of it, particularly addressing the current context in Europe for state heads, which keep or are kept very much as national initiatives. And also we say that even the IPSA, the interests, the important projects for European common interest are essentially national projects, and we need more and more to provoke and to facilitate European public procurement system. And we know again how to do it, because we have done it in COVID for the vaccines. Third, a revised cohesion policy, and some of you, I'm sure, are aware of the work and the debate currently promoted through the Joint Research Center in Seville, with many authors and thinkers throughout Europe, among others Cattell and Luc Sood, together with Sylvia Serger, has clearly addressed the way how we can better articulate a revisited European cohesion policy with an European framework program for research and innovation, and more guarantee a close articulation of the European Research Council together with the national agencies. At the same time, we differentiate the innovation agendas for the regional context. So a revisited cohesion policy will be critical together with European public procurement to make a better use of research and innovation and to allow the focus of the European Framework Program on frontier research and disruptive innovation. Last but not least, my fourth recommendation towards a new framework for prevention, preparedness, and readiness is what we have called a nuanced, granular, and revised global cooperation, including with Chinese scientists and North American scientists. But by addressing the context of better aligning our goals to act on our institutions and to accelerate the context for a new centrality of research and innovation, this idea of a transformative research agenda needs to be complemented, as I mentioned, by two other critical issues in my view. The second issue is to engage new generations, and that is the reason why we launched the idea of a Choose Europe program. But Choose Europe should be essentially about good quality of jobs for the young generations in Europe. And again, this has been shown to us in the last 3 years through the expert group on the economic and social impact on research, Andrea Renda and many others, which clearly have addressed, also built on the experience of Dan Roddick at the Harvard Kennedy School, on the need to revisit current science and above all industrial policy in general and better consider the quality of jobs as a critical factor and a critical vector beyond productivity. And essentially, we need to understand that Choose Europe is also about researchers, but essentially about the quality of jobs in the research and innovation context. Again, we should be proud. We should be very proud of the European context when we look at the last 20 years. Today, the number of researchers officially registered have passed to 2 million, so about 1% of the European labor force, while in 2011, in the last census, were below 1.4 million. And many of you may remember 20 years ago, in 2004, when Commissioner Philippe Busquin launched a task force about the need for Europe to have more scientists. By that time, we were losing researchers. And we have done it. We have increased considerably the number of researchers. We are in a country, Germany, with one of the highest levels, 11 researchers per 1,000 active population, similar to Portugal, similar to Slovenia, slightly below Belgium and Sweden. And throughout Europe, all the regions, not as much, but have increased the number of researchers. The point now is definitely we need to continue that, but we need to look at the quality of the research jobs. And the analysis has been very clear. We have here with us the Executive Director of Science in Europe, Lydia Borrell, 10 years ago in 2016, Science Europe, together with Eurodoc, have done a very comprehensive study about the mapping of about 109 funding schemes throughout Europe, and clearly identify that most of schemes run in short term, with definitely the notable exception of the European Research Council, and that has created an increasing dependence of institutions on short-term funding. And through that, we all have adopted in Europe what I consider, or what we consider to be, a bad practice of contracting young researchers by the duration of the project. This is a bad practice that we need to radically avoid. Recently, the CESAR Research Careers Survey in 2024 has made possible a survey with 24 leading universities throughout Europe and a few case studies, which clearly show unacceptable levels of precarity jobs in Europe. But together with the will of many universities able to and want to change that, and that therefore the recommendations for Choose Europe are essentially the need of a shared responsibility among the European Commission through a co-fund mechanism together with national and regional authorities, but also the shared responsibility of institutions at large, certainly university, research centers, but also firms, particularly SMEs, to take care of the quality of jobs, particularly in the research and innovation, in a way that can be then embraced by the labor sector at large. And again, this is not anymore a poor academic or technical issue. This has become, in the current political context, a very serious political issue because the precarity of jobs in the young generations have provoked, as we know, a disruptive support of the young adults to populist movements in many European regions, apart from those that we certainly recognize in North America and in Latin America. So this is not just a question or a technocratic question. This has become a central question in our political and social context in Europe. But my third point in this part was essentially beyond the need of, or the opportunity to strengthen a transformative research agenda and to engage young generations in a seriously way to revisitize the quality of research jobs. We also need to take more risks and consider failures as a step to success. Again, we now also in Europe have the evidence, for instance, that most or a large fraction at least of the startups funded through the European Innovation Council in the last years derived from fundamental research funded through the European Research Council. And these type of examples were typical, particularly of the United States. But now we have that reality in Europe. So we know how to do it. We have done it. In the last 5 years, we have created in Europe more startups than the United States. But why? Those that have really grown and have become the so-called unicorns with a market valuation above 1 million need to go to the West to attract the necessary funding levels. Again, this requires a complex financial structure together with specific governance systems. We have here in Germany important experience, the SPRIN-D experiment, and I believe it will be reported later today. In the United Kingdom, ARIA, the new Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, has also been created with that purposes, and that is the reason why we strongly recommended the European Commission to launch an experimental unit to test new ways of really understanding this articulation between frontier research and disruptive innovation, and the ways we need to better understand, to fund, to govern, and to stimulate European strategic autonomy by growing frontier research and disruptive innovation. Again, this comes to my third part, which is critical, important, and we all know at this level that is very nice to speak about the need of more research and innovation. Is a common sense within the scientific community, but the question is where the money comes from. And I will argue that more than ever, we need to emphasize the critical role of what has been called in Brussels by new European own resources. Actually, President von der Leyen in early July in the budget conference 2025 has clearly addressed the need for new European own resources. In the meantime, the Commission presented in mid-July the proposal for the next framework program, and although it clearly shows and proposes a standalone program, the budget is a good starting point, but not as large as we propose, 220 billion, not as large as the 200 billion Mario Draghi proposed. And again, 2 days ago, Mario Draghi emphasized that 175 billion won't be enough for the current challenge Europe is facing. But beyond funding research through the taxpayer contribution, as we have done it over the last 30 years, it is also clear that we need to effectively face the rise of new European own resources in articulation with European member states. We cannot forget that European or centralized European research and innovation and the European framework for research and innovation represents only about 8% of the overall financial envelope for the current 7-year period. And when we look together with the overall funding for research in all member states, we know that European research and innovation framework represents about 5 to 6% of the overall European research and innovation, fortunately enough, because of the national and regional investments, under which about 66 or 65% is essentially invested through the business sector. And essentially, we should be proud by the European diversity and our unique spectrum of the diversified situations throughout Europe. But to face the current situation, we should not blame, and actually what interesting 2 days ago to listen also in this argument, Mario Draghi, we should not blame. This is just a question of the private sector. This is also, and this is essentially, a question to raise public investment. And again, by raising public investment, we need to do it in a different way as before, and therefore the question of the new European own resources. And again, I will stress that we have done it. In the post-COVID zone, Europe has innovated significantly by all the member states authorizing the Commission to go to the financial markets and to raise the next generation EU program, particularly through the recovery and the resilience facility. So the way to raise European public procurement, to raise a new perspective on capital markets, and to invest in the European research and innovation ecosystem will require, beyond the framework program, new European own resources. And again, it is a role of all of us, all of you, of the leading stakeholders, particularly in Germany, to address this question in a critical issue. And again, I recall that the former president of the European Central Bank was very clear 2 days ago that we need to raise additional resources to foster public investments in research and innovation. And this will require a new way to address financial markets and capital markets by taking debt. Again, we all of us throughout Europe have a strong expectation on the new German coalition and government and the alterations done in the German constitution to make that happen. Last but not least, my final part is beyond funding, we need also to understand the governance. And my plea here is essentially to understand research and innovation as a portfolio of incentives that, again, we know better than no one else in Europe how to make it happen through competitive research, through industrial or research towards industrial competitiveness. Again, we argue for the absolute need to differentiate from research addressing societal challenge and also the building up of the research and innovation ecosystem. But to make it happen, we argue that we need to use lessons learned from the last 20 years in Europe. And again, we need always to recall that the best of our best program, the European Research Council, has become a world-leading program because of its independence governance. And we know that leaked documents from the FP10 are not addressing it properly. So how to face this? And actually, our argument is that the full framework program should be governed in a similar way through independent boards. Why is this? Again, lessons learned from the last 20 years or the last 10 years. And by being proud of the European project and our evolution, we also need to recognize how can we always do better, making use of the lessons learned from the last years. If we take Horizon 2020 and the first 3 years of Horizon Europe, we know that roughly, with the notable exception of the ERC, the EIC, and the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which represent 22% of the budget, the remaining 78% is a large budget, has been distributed increasingly through more and larger consortiums. And the data from the Commission clearly shows that in the last years of Horizon 2020 and the first 3 years of Horizon Europe, 78% of the budget was distributed through consortiums, in average with 11 partners, where each partner received about 127K per year during in average 3 years. And our argument is that this is becoming an excellent way to distribute funding, but not necessarily the best way to do science or to address societal challenge or to promote industrial competitiveness. See, for example, the case of the European missions. Many of you, I was particularly involved in a different in the promoting of the European mission and mission-oriented innovation policy 7 years ago. But the idea and all the original discussion was essentially to have different mechanisms of funding the distribution. And at the end of the day, the pressure of the national administrations and the administrations in Brussels has resulted that funding was distributed exactly in the same way as the remaining collaborative research through many large consortiums with very small projects. And although that can be used in some parts of the program, it should not be the reference everywhere. And for instance, for the case of missions and mission-oriented innovation policy, we clearly call for the absolute need to have political ownership, but also to competitively select the few institutions for longer-term projects. And again, this will require an independent governance. And again, we have done it in Europe. We have done it through the European Research Council. And again, many of you 20 years ago remember the discussions between 2000 and 2007, how difficult was the building up of ERC, where so many people didn't believe it would be possible. And it was. We have done it. It's a successful program with an independent governance, so we need to do more of that. And essentially, to really understand the new centrality for research and innovation, for a clear strategic autonomy of research, we need more funding, we need European resources, but we need an adequate governance, certainly in a way to really guarantee a portfolio of incentives considering the different ways we know that research and innovation do require, from frontier research, by looking at mono-beneficiaries through collaborative research, but by better observing the regimes of collaborative innovation to really escape the mid-tech trap that Jean Tirole and co-authors have called our attention. And again, this will require, as we all know, the complex issue of better articulating the European efforts with national and regional effort. And again, the current discussion by the Joint Research Council is particularly clear. To conclude, I have 1 minute. Again, thank you so much. I believe this is a discussion. We need more than ever scientific activism to make this priority a real and effective action in Europe at large. We are in a philanthropic association, and we also need to consider a better and a more relevant role of the collaboration between philanthropies and the public states, the European Commission in particular. And for that, we argue that we need to differentiate research towards industrial competitiveness from research towards the need to address emerging societal challenge. But overall, what I want is to thank you all for attending, and particularly the organizers, to keep us busy and alert for the need to build a better Europe. Thank you so much.
Professor Heitor, thank you very much. You're welcome to sit down if you like. We just have a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, Manuel. I'm Terry, by the way. Yeah, my name is Terry Martin. Some of you may have seen me here last year. I also had the privilege of moderating the opening panel, and it's a great privilege again to be back here this year. Before I do the opening panel, which is coming up in just a couple of minutes, I've been given the opportunity to put a couple of questions to Manuel. And I want to begin by asking you about a phrase that you used at the beginning and at the very end of your talk, and it's scientific activism. You're saying we need scientific activism, and you're encouraging everyone to promote that. What do you mean by scientific activism? What sort of activism would you suggest to the people in this room that they should be pursuing?
Speak, go to Brussels. We now go to Brussels, go to your governments, interact continuously with policymakers, with decision makers. Again, when we look back 7 years ago or 14 years ago, we know that all the initial proposals from the Commission has been reduced in terms of the research and innovation funds. And we note today that the current proposal that we all should discuss in Europe suggests a considerable decrease in subsidies to agriculture, to the so-called common agriculture policy. And actually a merger of that with the cohesion policy, which I myself understand as a very positive proposal. But it will have a lot, and it is already known, many reactions from farmers including. So scientists and research organizations should be actively not only sponsor, but ask for more.
For more money or more what? What is it?
More money and a better governance. We don't have enough funding when we compare to our competitors, and our competitors are essentially outside Europe, is not inside Europe, so we need more funding and a better governance. And this will require leading stakeholders like many of you acting every day. This is a daily fight. And we cannot assist the others acting because resources and public resources are always limited. So we need everyone to speak and to act.
And money will not do it alone, of course. Governance, you mentioned, being a key issue, and you outlined some of those ideas for governance within your talk just now. And of course, you've written on this extensively a lot. But I wanted to ask you about two needs that you also identified within Europe's agenda moving forward. One is the continued need for curiosity-driven research. You use that phrase again and again. But you also mentioned the need for disruptive innovation. And you seem to present a certain tension between those. And I wanted to ask you, are these, in your view, competing needs or complementary needs?
No competing, and we know more and more, as I just mentioned, and I'm sure that Maria Leptin and the SPRIN people later today will argue, we have now the evidence in Europe that disruptive innovation is coming essentially from curiosity-driven research. That has become very clear, among others, in the biosciences and the DRC, and the relation between disruptive innovation and startups funded through the IC, and the way they derived from fundamental research and curiosity-driven research funded through the DRC over the last 5 years is a clear evidence, particularly in the biosciences, but also in space research. We have the Körber Prize. I believe she's giving an interview outside, but is quantum computing and quantum communications. And that is really the confluence of frontier science with disruptive innovation. This is not new, and we did know it probably 20 years ago. Now we have the evidence that we can do it in Europe. So let's strengthen it.
Final question, because I'm told we have to stay to a pretty tight time regime here. Looking ahead to the next framework program for research and innovation, FP10, with your knowledge of how Horizon Europe evolved and programs before that, of course, what would you say is the principal scientific or societal challenge that FP10 can and should try to tackle?
Quality research. And quality research is excellent research. And that is the DNA of the European Framework Program. I was lucky enough, I did my PhD under the first and second framework program, so I follow all the framework programs. And essentially, we have seen some deviation from excellent research and innovation towards a mechanism of the distributing funding. And what we argue,
mechanism of what?
Distributing funding. And what we argue is that we need a revisited process of promoting excellent research and innovation, and then articulate with other mechanisms, like a revisited cohesion policy, a new European public procurement system, and certainly the close articulation with the national and regional funding. But the core of the program need to be focused and refocused on what we are really missing in Europe, is the adequate funding level for excellent research and innovation.
Manuel, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure meeting you, and I hope we can continue this conversation